each sentence and we will see what we say. Here we are speaking about the individual and the collectivity. And the collectivity is always at a lower level of consciousness than the individual. And the individual is the one who makes the first breakthrough in any field, whether it be in science, whether it be in philosophy, whether it be in spirituality. Everywhere it is the individual who makes the break. Okay? So remember that. Now he is explaining why it has to be the individual. It is because of the spiritual person. Note the word PCAP, person, spiritual person. That is the psychic being or the self or even the divine presence in everybody. Okay? There can be a difference between the divine presence in everybody and the psychic being. There can be a difference. These things are not as geometrical and mathematical as you think. So there are places where the indication is that the psychic being can be quite different from the divine presence. The psychic being is itself divine, but the general divine presence is there in everything, in stones, in caterpillars, in birds, trees. So that is also there in man. It is there everywhere, including me. So when you say spiritual person, it could be any of these. Okay? The divinity in the individual. See how he has kept it. Divinity is a very wide word, and it could be any of the three that I have mentioned. 90% of the time, it is the psychic being and the self. The divinity in the individual, that perfection or liberation, salvation, as it is called in the West, has to be individual and not collective. For whatever perfection of the collectivity is to be sought after can come only by the perfection of the individuals who constitute it. It's the individual who is first discovered, then there has to be a group, not one individual. Only if you have one individual, the collectivity does not benefit. Okay? That is the reason why, interestingly, when Sri Aurobindo was in Pondicherry, he said, I can make marvelous changes in the physical world provided I have 100 people who are at a spiritual level. Okay? So, and the 100 people he could not find, later on it boiled down to 12. And finally he had to do the work all by himself and mother. Okay, so they did that. But now the next step, okay, the supramental race on the earth has definitely to be with a group. And that's the reason why we have the collectivity in the ashram and Auroville. That's the whole attempt. One man is not enough. Okay? Just like if you have one stick, it is very breakable. But if you take 10 sticks of the same type, then it develops a more tenacious unbreakability. So that is the reason why you need not only one, but a collectivity. Okay? It is because of the spiritual person, the divinity in the individual, that perfection or liberation, salvation as it is called in the West, has to be individual and not collective. For whatever perfection of the collectivity is to be sought after can come only by the perfection of the individuals who constitute it. It is because the individual, just 1 second. I've lost my page. Yeah. It is because, where is it gone? It is because the individual is that. Okay? Again, see how he is keeping it pretty vague. He is not being very specific. Okay? Basically, the divinity. All the three words you can see, the divine person, divinity, and that. Okay? He is keeping it because different people can have different approaches. That's why he is keeping it general. The individual is that to find himself is his great necessity. In his complete surrender and self-giving to the Supreme, it is he who finds his perfect self-finding in a perfect self-offering. Now, it's very interesting. He is talking of self-offering and surrender also. It's very interesting. Someone asked me the other day, What is the difference between surrender and self-offering? Okay. Is there basically a difference? And then the person who asked the question was thinking more of the surrender on the battlefield. Okay? And she was thinking that surrender is forced. Okay? Surrender is forced. Whether you like it or not, you have to surrender. So I said that the meaning of surrender in the spiritual life is quite different. You calmly, quietly, passively accept whatever the circumstances of life are. That is surrender. Okay? But you can also surrender to the divine. And if you self-offering is something more not passive, it is active. You give yourself to the divine, it's a very positive movement. It's an outward going movement and it is very decisive. That's the difference between self-offering and surrender. It is in his complete surrender and self-giving. So both surrender is using both, see, therefore it's not the same. In his complete surrender and self-giving. First of all, you accept the divine conditions laid upon you. They seem to be world conditions, but actually it is divine conditions you are living laid on you. And then you give yourself to the divine as a second step. Okay? It is he who finds his perfect self-finding in a perfect self-offering. In the abolition of the mental, vital, physical ego, even of the spiritual ego, it is a formless and limitless individual that has the peace and joy of its escape from its own infinity. In the experience that he is nothing or no one, or everything and everyone, or the one which is beyond all things and absolute, it is a Brahman in the individual that effectuates that stupendous merger or this marvelous joining yoga of its eternal unit of being with its vast, all-comprehending or supreme, all-transcending unity of eternal existence. So there are many, many possibilities of how you find yourself. In the experience that he is nothing or no one, okay, this is someone who is sometimes uh, very humble. Okay? I'll give you an interesting example in Ramakrishna's life. Okay, but Sindhu is saying something else also. He's saying in the experience that he is nothing or no one, or everything and everyone. Okay, that's a cosmic consciousness. Okay, and it's very interesting. Ramakrishna said about two people in his entourage, in his among his disciples. There was one gentleman called Nag Mahasaya. Nag Mahasaya was a householder and he was a devotee of Ramakrishna. But he was very, very humble, very humble. And Vivekananda, on the contrary, was tremendously self-confident. Okay? So you can see the difference between the two. And Ramakrishna said something very interesting. He said both will get realization. In fact, he said, he used a very interesting image. He said, Nag Mahasaya is so small that no net of Prakriti can capture him. Even the smallest hole he will be able to escape because of his humility. And in Vivekananda's case, no net of Prakriti will be able to capture him because he is too big for any net. No net is big enough to catch him. So, Sindhu is using both these. One is saying, you are nothing or no one, or everything and everyone. The divine is not limited to only one path. There are 100 paths by which you can realize him. Or the one which is beyond all things and absolute. So in a sense, you can say, when he is nothing or no one, you can say the individual, and everything and everyone is the universal, or the one who is beyond all things is the transcendent. So in all these three ways, you can find yourself. Okay? That's what Vindhya said. It is a Brahman in the individual that effectuates this stupendous merger or this marvelous joining yoga of this eternal unit of being with its vast, all-comprehending and supreme, all-transcending unity of eternal existence. So it's a Brahman, it is divine himself, who is doing it in the either the transcendent divine as a transcendent individual or the transcendent the universal individual or the individual himself. It's a Brahman who is doing the work. To get beyond the ego is imperative, but one cannot get beyond the self except by finding it supremely universal. So, because the self is infinite, the self is universal already. So how can you go beyond the universe? Unless he says you find it by supremely, universally, you go to the transcendent. So that is possible. For the self is not the ego. It is one with all and the one, and in finding it, it is the all and the one that we discover in ourselves. The contradiction, the separation disappears. But the self, the spiritual reality, remains united with the one and the all by the delivering disappearance. Disappearance of the ego and the limitations of the individual. Okay? I'm reading out the summary of what he said here, then it becomes clear. The true individual is a spiritual person, not the ego. The true individual is a spiritual person. The divine is the individual. That is the reason why the perfection of the collective cannot come except by the perfection of the individuals that constitute the collectivity. This is a great necessity for the individual to realize his own divinity. This he can do by surrender and self-offering to the Supreme Divine. When he does that, the ego sense of separation in the physical, vital, and mental disappears. There is then no separate individual anymore. Man realizes he is the all or the one. It is the Brahman that causes this tremendous merger to happen. To go beyond ego is essential. But when we go to the self, there is no more any separation. We become universal. We are no more spacious in time and space. This self, which is universal, one with all, is a true individual. That's what it is. The individual has become universal. The ego disappears. Personality now becomes almost impersonality, both together. Okay. So now we can go to the next para. The higher self-knowledge begins. Remember, he is talking about the transformation which will allow the Superman to manifest. So he is going step by step. He is telling you how to. Individual is not enough, it has to be collectivity. And the collectivity will follow the individual realization. We go to the next one. The higher self-knowledge. Nobody has to read. Archana, you can read if you have the text.
Yes, Rangata.
Yeah, go ahead.
It is because of the spiritual person, the divinity in the individual, that perfection or liberation, salvation, as it is called in the West, has to be individual and not.
Archana, just a minute.
Yes.
That is the one we just now read. Okay?
Next para.
No, Rangata.
We have to read page 724.
Yeah.
The next
The
paragraph.
higher self-knowledge begins.
That's
sorry, Rangata. Very sorry.
It's okay.
The higher self. My page had turned and I started reading the second paragraph. Okay, Rangata. And the higher self-knowledge begins, therefore, as soon as man has got beyond his preoccupation with the relation of nature and God to his superficial being, his most apparent self. One step is to know that this life is not all, to get at the conception of his own temporal eternity, to realize, to become concretely aware of that subjective persistence, which is called the immortality of the soul. When he knows that there are states beyond the material and lives behind and before him, at any rate, a pre-existence and a subsequent existence, He is on the way to get rid of his temporal ignorance by enlarging himself beyond the immediate moments of time into the possession of his own eternity. Another step forward is to learn that sorry, that his surface waking state is only a small part of his being, to begin to fathom the abyss of the inconscient and depths of the subconscient and subliminal, and scale the heights of the superconscient. So he commences the removal of his psychological self-ignorance. A third step is to find out that there is something in him other than his instrumental mind, life, and body. Not only an immortal, ever developing individual soul that supports his nature, but an eternal, immutable self and spirit, and to learn what are the categories of his spiritual being until he discovers that all in him is an expression of the spirit and distinguishes the link between his lower and his higher existence. Thus, he sets out to remove his constitutional self ignorance. Discovering self and spirit, he discovers God. He finds out that there is a self beyond the temporal. He comes to the vision of that self in the cosmic consciousness as the divine reality behind nature and this world of beings. His mind opens to the thought or the sense of the absolute, of whom self and the individual and the cosmos are so many faces. The cosmic, the egoistic, the original ignorance begin to lose the rigidness of their hold upon him. In his attempt to cast his existence into the mold of the enlarging self knowledge, his whole view and motive of life, thought, and action are progressively modified and transformed. His practical ignorance of himself, his nature, and his object of existence diminishes. He has set his step on the path which leads out of the falsehood and suffering of a limited and partial into the perfect possession and enjoyment of a true and complete existence.
Yeah. So actually what Sindhu is doing here, he has in one paragraph told about the 7 ignorances that man has. And he has written of all the 7 ignorances. He has listed them here. But there is a whole chapter in Life Divine, the 7 ignorances, where it goes 20 pages. Here, this is typical of Sindhu. Okay? He can expand on one subject, but he can also condense it to one paragraph. So he is now telling what is meant by the individual finding himself, self-finding, what is meant by that. So he is telling you all the 7 ignorances. So we'll see what the ignorances are, and we will also note them down and make a list. 7 ignorances. Now, the higher self-knowledge begins therefore as soon as man has got beyond his preoccupation with the relation of nature and God to his superficial being, his most apparent self. So which is the most apparent self? Is body, mind, plus ego. That's the apparent self. So he has to get beyond the preoccupation with nature and God to his superficial being. He has to go out of the superficial being. Okay? So one step is to know that this life is not all, to get at the conception of his own temporal eternity. Okay? He is talking of the temporal ignorance. That is to say, this is not my only life. I have had lives before and I will have lives afterwards. Okay? That's a temporal ignorance. His own temporal eternity. Now it's very interesting what is temporal eternity. Okay? What was the contradiction? So, because when the psychic being does not die, even in time and space, there is a non-temporal, outside time and space, there is an eternity, and that is the self. But the psychic being is in temporal eternity. It is eternal, but in time and space. The self is not in time and space. Okay? It is outside time and space. Then, to get at the conception of his own temporal eternity, to realize, to become concretely aware of that subjective persistence, which is called the immortality of the soul. So, when you go to the self, you realize that you have always existed and that you will always continue to exist. Unless by what Sindhu calls moral surgery, and spiritual suicide, you actually completely dissolve your own personality. But that's another thing altogether. When he knows that there are states beyond the material and lives behind and before, lives. When he knows that there are states beyond the material and lives behind and before him, at any rate, a pre-existence and a subsequent existence. Pre-existence, your past lives. Subsequent existence, your future lives. He is on the way to get rid of temporal ignorance. So temporal ignorance, number one. Okay. And what is that? You are not conscious of your psychic being. When you realize your psychic being, then your temporal ignorance is gone. Okay. So that's the first one. The next one. Another step forward is to learn that his surface waking state is only a small part of his being, to begin to fathom the abyss of the inconscient and the depths of the subconscious and subliminal and scale the heights of the superconscious. So he commences the removal of his psychological ignorance. This is the second one. So normally we think that we are body, mind, life, and ego. That's what it is. Not even ego, because ego is not, you don't identify. Ego is something that makes you feel separate from everybody else. So when you think your body, mind, life, you're psychologically ignorant of yourself. Then what are you? You are the whole. You are the complete. And that is, if you go below, subconscious and inconscient, if you go into yourself, it is the intraconscious or the subliminal version we are using the word. And if you go above, it is the superconscious. And what about all around you? That's the circumconscious. So when you realize that all these things are there, your psychological ignorance disappears. Okay? Second step. Another step is to learn forward that we have read just now. He commences the removal of psychological ignorance. The third one. The third step is to find out that there is something in him other than his instrumental mind, life, and body. Not only an immortal, ever-developing individual soul that supports his nature, but an eternal, immutable self and spirit. And to learn what are the categories of the spiritual being until he discovers that all in him is an expression of the spirit and distinguishes the link between his lower and higher existence. Thus he sets out to remove his constitutional self-ignorance. So that's the third. Constitutional self-ignorance. What is that? You are not only body, mind, life. You are the self. You are the spirit. Okay? You are everything. Normally, that awareness comes through the self. So you see that when you realize the self, your constitutional ignorance is gone. Okay? Third step is gone. Then the next one. Discovering self and spirit, he discovers God. He finds out that there is a self beyond the temporal. Okay? He comes to the vision of that self in the cosmic consciousness as a divine reality behind nature and this world of beings. His mind opens to the thought or the sense of the absolute, of whom self and individual and cosmos are so many faces. The cosmic, the egoistic, the original ignorance begins to lose the rigidness of his hold upon him. So, there is original ignorance. The original ignorance, you are coming from the absolute. You are not something that exists only in the physical world. That's the original ignorance. That's the fourth. So, one by one, he will not tell us. Then, actually, it goes on into the next paragraph also. So, we'll see what goes on. There is a practical ignorance and there's something else also. There are 7 ignorances. So, in his attempt to cast an existence in the mold of this enlarging self-knowledge, now we know that he is not only body, mind, life, he is psychic being, he is self, he is the absolute. So, enlarging self-knowledge, his whole view and motive of life, thought, and action are progressively modified and transformed. In the beginning, you think the purpose of life is to maintain your family, get a good job. That's the first one. Then you realize that no, a spiritual life is more. That also is not enough. Okay? You have to realize that you have to become the divine. So slowly, self-progression is going on. The practical ignorance of himself, okay, that disappears. When his object of essence, existence diminishes. He now realizes what his work in the physical world is. He has set his step on the path which leads out of the falsehood and suffering of a limited and partial into the perfect position and enjoyment of a true and complete existence. So that's a practical ignorance. Ignorance also is powerful. Now, the next paragraph will tell you several others. Okay? So let's see. Yasmin, you have the text with you?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Agree.
In the course of
Dada,
yeah. Tell me.
Dada, can I proceed a little slow, Dada?
Can I?
Can we proceed a little slow? Because I think we are completing the paragraphs very fast, so I am unable to enjoy your explanation, because I always used to enjoy your explanation in a very depth.
Okay,
So
okay.
can we proceed a little slow, Dada?
All right, I understand what you're saying. That's my nature to go fast. Okay. So,
No. I always used to watch the YouTube videos, and always every time your words is always I am just like spontaneously coming your words, because I am in particular every day I am watching your YouTube videos for 1 to 2 hours must. So always the words are coming to me. Please, and I used to enjoy your explanations always. So
okay.
please try to just a little slow, Dada. I will enjoy. I can enjoy. I don't know about others' opinion.
No, I've understood what you're saying. Okay. I've understood.
Thank you, Dada.
What we will do, there are many others also. Huh? So remember that there are many others also. So what I'll do, I'll finish all the ignorances from the next paragraph, and then I will summarize it for you in a very slow manner. Okay. Now you read the next. In the course of this progress, Yasmin is going.
In the course of this progress, he discovers step by step the unity of the three categories with which he started. For first, he finds that in his manifest being, he is one with cosmos and nature, mind, life, and body. The soul in the succession of time, the conscient, subconscient, and superconscient. These in their various relations, and the result of their relations are cosmos and our nature. But he finds too that in all which stands behind them or on which they are based, he is one with God. For the absolute, the spirit, the self, spaceless and timeless, the self manifest in the cosmos and Lord of nature. All this is what we mean by God. And in all this, his own being goes back to God and derives from it. He is the absolute, the self, the spirit, self-projected in a multiplicity of itself into cosmos and veiled in nature. In both of these realizations, he finds his unity with all other souls and beings. Relatively in nature, since he is one with them in mind, vitality, matter, soul, every cosmic principle and result. However, however various in energy, an act of energy, disposition of principle, and disposition of result, but absolutely in God, because the one absolute, the one self, the one spirit is ever the self of all and the origin, possessor and enjoyer of their multitudinous diversities. The unity of God and nature cannot fail to manifests itself to him, but he finds in the end that it is the Absolute who is all these relativities. He sees that it is the spirit of whom every other principle is a manifestation. He discovers that it is the self who has become all these becomings. He feels that it is the Shakti or power of being and consciousness of the Lord of all beings, which is nature and is acting in the cosmos. Thus, in the progress of our self-knowledge, we arrive at that by the discovery of which all is known as one with ourself, and by the possession of which all is possessed and enjoyed in our own self-existence.
Okay, so they have not given you the other 2-3 other ignorances, but he has tell you now here is there. There is the ignorance of the absolute. That's what he is telling you. We'll read slowly and we will see what he is saying. It is implied. The ignorance is implied. In the course of this progress, he discovers step by step the unity of the 3 categories with which he started. Which are the 3 categories? The individual, the cosmic, and the transcendent. But whatever category he started with, that's different. So he finds the 3 categories are his mind, life, and body, and the soul in succession of that. I'm reading the second sentence. But first, he finds that in his manifest being, he is one with cosmos and nature. So, manifest being, body, mind, life. Okay? That is manifested. The soul has not manifested. It is unmanifest to himself. Okay? He is one with cosmos, nature. Mind, life, and body, and the soul in the succession of time, the conscient, the subconscious, and the superconscious. You can also think of when he's saying step by step 3 categories, the 3 categories can also be, it can be a little confusing, but what he means here ultimately is the conscient, the subconscious, and the superconscious. The conscient is a normal consciousness, the subconscious is that is below us, and the one that is above us, they are ignorant of, that is superconscious. These, in their various relations, and the result of their relations are cosmos and nature. So, in the beginning, you are very alert, you are quite alert, and you are quite knowledgeable that you are part of the cosmos. Okay? That's what he mentioned. But he finds too, now cosmos and nature is more or less the same thing. Okay? The cosmos is the cosmos, but nature also is in the cosmos itself. So, and nature also is universal mind, universal life, universal body. That's like the individual mind, individual life, and individual body. That's a manifest being. But he finds too that in all which stands behind them, or on which they are based, he is one with God. For the absolute, the spirit, the self, spaceless and timeless, the self manifest in the cosmos and Lord of nature. So this is what we call now this is the absolute. So by implication, they are ignorant of the absolute. Whereas we call that the absolute ignorance. That also has to be removed. So when you remove that, you realize that you are not only your body, mind, life, and you are one with nature, but you are also one with the transcendent. You are from the highest. He is one with God. You realize that you are part of the divine also. Amsha Sanatana, as the Gita says. Okay? For the absolute, the spirit, the self, spaceless and timeless, the self manifest in the cosmos and Lord of nature. Lord of nature is the Purushottama. Remember. Okay? That's the supramental level. All this is what we mean by God. And in all this, his own being goes back to God and derives from it. It is God who is the origin of all your existence in every way. He is the absolute, the self, the spirit, self-projected in a multiplicity of itself into cosmos and veiled in nature. So he creates the cosmos but hides himself in the cosmos. Okay? In both of these realizations, he finds his unity with all other souls and beings. Relatively in nature, since he is one with them in mind, vitality, matter, soul, every cosmic principle and result, however various in energy and active energy, disposition of principle and disposition of result, but absolutely in God, because the one absolute, the one self, the one spirit is ever the self of all and the origin, possessor and enjoyer of their multitudinous diversity. The unity of God and nature cannot fail to manifest itself to him. Okay? God is the transcendent and nature is the universal, and he realizes that they are all same thing. He realizes that actually all these three, okay, transcendent, universal and individual, are all the same thing. He realizes that. And you can also say in different words, subconscious, conscious, subconscious and superconscious. The three levels, transcendent, cosmic and individual. Different words for the same thing. The unity of God and nature cannot fail to manifest itself to him. So, God is obviously transcendent and nature is universal. And the individual is realizing that he is all this. They are one and he is all. But he finds in the end that it is the absolute who is all these relativities. The absolute is sheer oneness. And all the others that are there below are his own expressions and his own manifestations. They are relative. He sees that it is the spirit of whom every other principle is a manifestation. Whatever you see is a manifestation of the spirit, is a manifestation, an expression of the spirit. He discovers that it is the self who has become all these becomings. In the Upanishads, we are very clearly, and Sri also keeps repeating, the one in the many in the one, and the one becoming the many. This also you can understand in this way. The one in the many is the divine in everybody. Okay? And you feel, when you realize that aspect, you feel that you are in everybody. You feel that you are there in everybody with a different body, but you are there in everybody. Then the other one is many in the one. Okay? Many in the one is a cosmic consciousness where you feel that the whole universe is within your own being. Okay? Then, and the final is the divine himself has become all these things. Okay? That's it. The being becoming becomes the becoming. Okay? The being becomes the becoming. The one becomes the many. Okay? And that also, you should remember in Life Divine, very first page, okay, he says that. He says that the universe is a fit material for him to live. It's a fit vestment. You can talk of it as a cloth or a house. So, the universe is a fit material. It's not what the Mahabharata says that it is rigid and undivided. No, it is not. Then finally he says that not only is matter a fit material for the divine to live in, but it is itself the divine. So that's what he's mentioning here. Okay? So, becoming the divine. Okay? Thus, in the progress of our self-knowledge, we arrive at that by the discovery of which all is known as one with ourselves, and by the possession of which all is possessed and enjoyed in our own self-existence. This is expressed in the Upanishads as Yasmin Vijjate Sarvam Vijjata. That which being known, everything else is known. That's the absolute. So that's the ignorance of the absolute disappears. Okay? So it's 8:40 and we have still not finished all the ignorances. We have still got some more. So that's the next page. But we have to stop here today. It's already 8:40. Next we'll continue next week, equally by virtue of this unity. So he has told us that temporal ignorance, the psychological ignorance, the constitutional ignorance, the original ignorance, the practical ignorance, and the absolute ignorance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. One more ignorance is there. We'll see that next time. Okay? Okay, I'm stopping now.
Thank you, Rangata.
Thank you, Rangata.
Have a nice day, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you,
Rangata,
Dada. Arobar.